Welcome, everyone. Excited to have you on this session. Today, we're going to talk about smart Tableau filtering. Lauren, what do you have for us? I mean, what are we getting into today?
Yeah, I was thinking we'll go through like the order of operations of the different
Mm,
filters, kind of the benefits in terms of performance of different filters, and we'll make them come to life.
yeah, okay. That's great. That sounds good. Awesome. Okay. The A reminder that every month we do a data-driven community event. Middle of the month, Lauren, I don't even know how many we've done. It's probably been 50, maybe 20, 15 or 20, but
Yeah.
excited to keep this rolling. Um, Tell your friends, tell coworkers if they want to join. Featured speakers. I'll be the MC. Lauren, you'll be taking the screen and giving us a presentation today. I'll have new headshots that we update, by the way. We got new headshots as a company, so we'll put that in there in
Yes, thank you.
the new slides. All right, so smarter filtering with Tableau. Just a reminder, guys, virtual meeting here. You do have the option to come off mute if you have any questions. You can also use the chat window. Um, we'll open it up for Q&A at the very end, but if you're not talking, if you can stay on mute, that'll help Lauren tremendously. We've had really good success with that in these sessions, so thank you very much. Lauren, do you want to tell the folks on the call about your experience? We might have some new people on here.
Yeah, so I'm Lauren Cristaldi. I'm out of Charleston, South Carolina, and I worked for the state of South Carolina for about 4.5 years. So I come from a state government background, and I've been using Tableau for over 7 years now.
Okay.
And I love
You've
formatting.
You do love formatting, and you had applied to the Iron Viz this year, I
Oh
believe, or
yeah, I always forget to plug that.
yeah. Well, I'll put that in there for the next slide. I think folks know who I am. I lead the sales team at Matrix, but have been in Tableau for about 11 years and used to work there. Um, I think we can get right to it, Lauren. Let's jump right in. So, smarter Tableau filtering.
That's good.
We'll get ready for our live demo. Let me stop sharing. And like always, guys, we have this session recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube page. That YouTube channel is just Zio Matrix on YouTube, and every session's recorded. They're also sent out via email after the session. But Lauren, you can take it away.
Yeah, just to add to that, a lot of times I'll publish these workbooks. So if you want to go back and look at the workbook or see how I did anything, it's either on the Zio Matrix Tableau Public, or sometimes it'll be on my Tableau Public, or
Cool.
like a different version of it. Because I know for me at least, I've found that it's easier to learn by like downloading a workbook that exists and try to reverse engineer it. But everybody's different. Just sometimes that can help. Yeah, let's jump into filtering. So with Tableau, you have a lot of filtering options, and it can be kind of overwhelming because it's like, well, what does this even mean? And which one should I use? Like for my data, do I have a lot of data? Do I have not that much data? Where is it coming from? How is this affecting the performance of my dashboard? Sometimes people fall into, you know, they use too many filters because they're thinking that they want the users to have as much flexibility as possible. But in reality, users don't actually need that many filters, and it negatively impacts performance, especially like string fields. Those are the least performant because it just the how it computes, it takes forever. So compared to other filters. So yeah, to start off, we have extract filters. So these are ones that are applied to your data source, so your extract. They're different from data source filters because if we go over here, and I'm just connected to Superstore, if we created an extract, and then we said edit, this is where you'd apply these extract filters. So if I only wanted to see, let's see, a certain segment, just consumer. Now when I go and build a new sheet, before it even gets to the sheet, it's already pre-filtered. And this can be really the most performant, especially when you're applying even more filters, or if you have a lot of sheets, or let's say those other segments have a ton of data and you don't necessarily need them. It pre-filters everything out. So you're not having to, Tableau's not having to load as much data as it would normally. Because I mean, usually it'll load all the data, then you're applying the filters, then it's trying to kind of narrow down what you actually want, but it has to load everything first, if that makes sense. So these can be really useful when you have large data sets with different dimensions or categories that you don't necessarily need for the specific workbook that you're creating. And I'm just going to go ahead and take that off. If you want to get rid of those filters, you go back to the data source tab, and we would just delete this and save the settings. Now when we go back, all those segments are back. So yeah, those are our extract filters. Then we have data source filters. And that towards the end, I'm going to show you some dynamic zone and how we can do different dashboard actions that are related to like quick filters would be like your dashboard actions. So that's why this is just the go to data source tab. Just had to throw that out there. There's a plan. So data source filters would be the next in the operation because we're applying that extract filter. That's before you even create any worksheets or views. You're just saying, I want this subset of this data to load initially. So now we have the data source filters, which if we go to a new sheet, and let's say we have customer name right now, but I only want to see, and we can use segment again. I only want to see consumer. And maybe some of my other dashboards, I'll want to see a different segment. Or I want that flexibility to change this. So we want this to apply everywhere. To do that, you say all using this data source. And that's how we have that data source filter. So now we only have customers that fall into that segment. And every time you create a new sheet or you have existing sheets, this data source filter will already be applied, which can be nice when you're building a lot of sheets and you don't want to have to remember the exact, like if you have a common filter across all of them, you don't have to remember to apply that every time that you create a new sheet or go back to old sheets and have to apply that filter. So next we have context filters. The context filters are cool because they help with that order. So basically any of these filters, if you add them to context, they're going to be applied before other filters are applied. So if we create a sheet, and let me go ahead and take this segment off. And we say, let's look at all of our products or like categories and product name. So I just want to see let's even take this off. Let's just look at product names. And I want to see the top 10 products by, let's say, sales. Okay, so easy enough. But if I were to go in now and drag this segment in, just say consumer and apply. Now we only have 9 rows, but we want the top 10. So with that order of operations, the segment would be a dimension filter, and that falls below these, like a context filter or set filter. So that means it's being applied after the like the top 10. And the top 10 is technically a dimension filter, but it's really like a set, because you're creating a set essentially saying, I just want the top 10 based on this criteria. So, and I just wanted to add in some sales, so that looked kind of weird. So if we have our product name in that top 10, and we want to see just in the consumer segment, I want a top 10 because I'm applying that extra filter. We'd add this to context, and now you have all 10. And this can get kind of annoying if you have a lot of different filters that you don't necessarily want them to be in context, because let's say you have like a fixed calculation or a fixed LOD. If you have something in context, those filters still get applied within that LOD, even though you have it fixed. So if you want to avoid doing that, we could either create a set, so like product name, you can do it from here. Here's all our products, and we can tell it, I want a top 10 of sales. We can also do that from the fields list as well. So you just do create set, select from list, or do a top or another condition. So now if we replace this with the product name set, which brings us to after context filters, we have the set filters, but these are before the dimension filters. Now, if we remove this from context, this is still showing us only 9. Oh, sorry. And we're making sure that we're showing members in set. And this is where it gets tricky, because if you go based off the order, these set filters should really happen before the dimension filter. But like I said, when you are using this kind of a set, you really need to add your other filters to context to get that full top 10 relative to those other filters. Something I really like to do, though, instead of a top 10 or even using a set, I'll create an index calculation. I just call it index, and just the function index. Then okay. I'll make that discrete. This will number our rows. I can remove this from context. If we do edit table calculation, and specific dimensions, this is just so that it'll number it based on every single row. So if we had multiple dimensions up here, you would select all of those. And it's just another, this is also another way to sort. Let's say I want to sort by sales, sum, descending. So now we have all of these numbered. Well, I want the top 10 based on that sales sum descending. So we come over here to index, we'll filter it, and I'll just select 1 through 10. And now we can have that filter that's still being applied, but the index is applied after. So you're getting a true top 10 after you've filtered for consumer. Which I know I'm jumping around a lot, but that's just filters, guys. There's an order, but there's a lot of nuances to it. So like technically index is a table calculation. So that's applied last, which is why all of these other filters came before it. So we're getting that top 10 after everything else has been applied. And for a measure filter, if we were to take, like, let's do the sum of sales. And let's say I only want to see, do filter. I want to see values that are greater than like 1,000. And since our top 10 is the descending sum of sales, that's not really doing much right now. But if we go back in here, we edit that table calc, and we change this to ascending, and we can remove this because it needs to be set up again. Now we'll filter this again. Just select those 10. Whereas before, when we were doing the ascending, it had, values that were like 1 point something or very, very low in the hundreds. Now we're making sure that this sum of sales is applied before we take that top 10 of the lowest. And we only want to see after that threshold of like 1,000. So these are our basic filters and kind of how they're applied in this order. Are there any questions? I know that's kind of a lot.
I
Cool.
had one that I put in the chat. When you select a filter and pick apply to this all using this data source. Let me look at what it
Yeah.
actually says. What's the difference when you put apply to worksheets all using this data source versus all using related data sources?
So yeah, that's a good question. So with all using related data sources, basically it's looking for, let's say you had another data source like that you were blending on and you wanted it to relate. You wanted that same one to apply to the blended data source. So if we had customer name in both sources and you were filtering on customer name, then you'd say all using related data source. So both of those data sources and all the sheets connected to them would be, you have like a single point of control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so they have to be blended in some way. They can't just be separate data sources, maybe like a duplicate data model that might have a slightly different variable they join on.
So yeah, you can, as long as they have, you just have to tell it, you don't actually have to blend it like in a sheet, like have those fields blended. It just needs to know how to relate to that other data source. So an icon over here will pop up and it'll say use this linking field. And that's where you would link it. And just so it knows that that exists in both. That can get kind of tricky though. I would recommend using parameters if you're going to have multiple data sources that you want to filter across. I just find it to be more reliable. And then since we're going down the list, let's see. Yeah, the selected worksheets, this would be if you just want this to apply to certain worksheets. And all the worksheets in your workbook would come up that are also connected to that data source. Any other questions?
I think that was the only one for now, Lauren.
Awesome. So now that we've gone through the order of operations and we've kind of built out some of these examples, I think my favorite filter, if I had to choose one, would be like the action filters. So to set those up, and we'll just make a sample dashboard with some different views. So let's do, I like using map a lot. We bring out country. We'll make this a map. And we can just focus on the US. So here's our map. I'll make this a little bit, like stand out a little bit more. So we do background layers. I'll take away the base. Now we have our different states. And let's do kind of a heat map. So we have our map and we can just make like a simple bar chart. Just throw out category, sales, sales by category. Now if we create a dashboard, and I always use containers. Drop the map into the container. Put that sales category with it. And there are a couple ways to do this. So we can simply say use as filter and then select a state. And then now you have that dashboard action filter or quick filter. And these are a lot more performant than having a list. If we had a list of the states, it would take longer for the views to load. I mean, depending on your data set, it may not even be noticeable, but if you have a large data set, it can definitely have an impact. Then we can also filter the other way. Use this as filter. We'll select furniture or office supplies. And it's just showing all of those states that are selling those categories. Also, if you, let's say we made another sheet and we called it like customer list. And I'll just leave it like that for now. And I want this to go next to these. So for that, I'm going to put a vertical container in here. I'm going to just add that customer list in. Put my sales category in that vertical container within the horizontal container. Same with the state. We can distribute these evenly too. And now that we added that new sheet, since we have this already applied, the new sheet will adopt it. So now you can see all the customers in the different states or that are selling within these categories or buying within these categories. We could see just furniture in Illinois. So if you select Illinois and then Control or Command click furniture, that way you can select multiple filters at once. So now we can see just furniture in Illinois instead of having the drop downs. If you prefer having those filters available though, if we add in, you have to make sure that, like say a filter is not already on the filter shelf in a sheet, as long as it exists, like the field exists on the sheet, we can create a filter from it. So if I do that drop down and do filters, state or province, and I'm going to add a different container just for those filters. Pop that in there. Let's say I want one that's also on category. And we'll do the same thing with the distribute evenly. Now, right now, these are only going to work on these sheets or where they're coming from. So to fix that, we do apply to worksheets, kind of like on the worksheet from earlier. And we can either do selected worksheets or one of the other options. I usually do selected worksheets and then just say select all on dashboard. And we'll do that again over here. Then I usually, if the list is more than 5, I'll do a single value dropdown or a multiple values dropdown. If it's less than 5, like this one, and you want to see all of those at once, it's kind of cool having the radio buttons just to mix it up. But I'll make that in multiple values. So yeah, now these are being applied everywhere. Another feature, so you can do only relevant values. This will make it so that filtered list, like let's say one of the states where we didn't have the furniture category. If we select that state, it's gonna only show the relevant values for that selection. So it's filtering the filter basically. And the same for the list, for the states. Another option when you're customizing, let's say you don't want the all value, you can remove that. It'll just say multiple when you have everything selected. Or maybe you want the all value, but you don't want every time the user unselects, everything is blank. You can do customize show apply button. Now you can make those changes, hit apply, and the user's never left with a blank screen. Any questions? We can start talking about dynamic zone.
Lauren, I think we have a few questions. Let me see. All right. What is the order of execution of the action filters? Is it the same level as of the dimension filters?
So yeah, good question. Yeah, they're basically a dimension filter. But it's almost like they're not having to load a whole list though. So you're just making a selection of something that's already loaded and in the view, which is why they're a little bit different from the dimension filters. But technically it's within that order of operations. So after all of your extract filters, data source filters, set filters, and context filters, that's when these are applied.
So it's basically, yeah, it's like a dimension filter in that order.
Yeah.
Cool. Another one was, how do you get them to the map setting? Is it built into Tableau or was that already in the data set?
Oh, the map settings. So the background layers.
Yeah, Shauna, did you mean the background layers or?
Yeah, so I think that you dragged a couple variables from the data set on the worksheet. And that's when the map appeared. I think it was just latitude and longitude. I don't know if you had to do something else to set that map setting because I see map settings quite a bit in Tableau. But I don't do myself. So I just want to make sure that I just don't know how to really set that up or if it was already in the data set because I noticed that you just dragged it. But I don't know if there's also a default setting of some sort.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good question. So yeah, the latitude and longitude are auto-generated, unless you already have latitude and longitude in your data set, but you don't necessarily need them. So over here, this from Superstore, this is already baked in. But let's say you had a data set that had, an address or something like with state, city, zip code. You create a hierarchy so that those relate to each other. And then you just make sure that they were coded as a geo field. And to do that, if it doesn't have this little globe, that means it's not a geo field. And sometimes like a country or region or state will come in and it won't be already a geographic field.
Okay.
So you'd go to this geographic role and you'd select from this list. And Tableau uses Mapbox, so that's how it's able to get that spatial information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. This is,
Yeah.
yes, great.
Yeah, no problem. And that's, you just like drag it in, you drop it, it'll make this sample map because it recognizes that field type. And then from the marks card, if you want it to have a more filled in look, you would just select map. And
Oh,
there's a lot of different layers, so you can keep adding layers to the map, like for city, and then those can be the circles, or they could also be map.
oh, wow. I'm excited about this. I would like to run some data at county level and get some visuals. So I'm excited.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, and county's one of the out of the box field types. So yeah, where is that? Yep, county. So you don't have to do anything crazy on the back end, which is always nice.
Well, there's one more question, but why don't we wait till the end and we'll get to it. It's a good question. You keep going.
Okay. Yeah, that works. So earlier I brought up how we can use dynamic zone with those dashboard actions, which is like our dashboard. If we go to this one again, we go up to dashboard actions and see those have already been, let me just do this sheet. Those ones that were generated from selecting on the sheet level, they're showing up here. So there's a few different options with the actions. One of my favorites is using dynamic zone. So let's say I want this sheet to pop up when I select extract filters, a different one when I select data source, kind of like what's going on up here, but this is all on a single sheet. If I want to do that for if I want to switch sheets by selecting another sheet or another value on another sheet, then I would, well, first let's go over here to that sheet I already have in there. And I made those in this one. So I always call my dynamic zone calcs just DZ because it's easier, especially if you have a lot of calculations or a lot of fields. We need a parameter. So that parameter is just going to look like, I just make it an integer because it's easier. And depending on your data, I mean, it could be a string as well. It'll work all the same. But I just do all values because we're going to use an action to actually change the value. And I've actually used this a lot for dates. So let's say you had a button and it said like month to date, year to date, and then quarter to date. As long as you put in the sheet what you want that new value to be to filter by when you're changing that parameter. Like over here, I have the row. So when we go up to dashboard actions, I used a change parameter. I'm usually good about naming them, but I didn't have time. And then you just select all the sheets that you want to work with this same change parameter. And we'd say target parameter would be that filter info selection I was showing. And we want it to change by the row number. But if I want to apply it here, so for this sheet, let's say I only want it to show up when we have that first dynamic zone. which if we check back here, we've already filtered it to 1, so we know that that row is just going to be 1. And I kind of went through that fast. So if you select the sheet on the dashboard and you go over to layout and control visibility using value, that's where you would select one of those dynamic zone calcs that you made. And they don't need to actually be on the sheet or anywhere, just they have to exist within the data set. Now, I think because we already have that, yep, that's already working. Because we already have that dashboard action applied to change that same parameter, and we're using the same parameter, it already knows what to do to change that value of the parameter. So this gets hidden when that parameter changes to like row 2, which would be the data source filters. But it comes back when you say extract filters, or when you select extract filters. And we can do this to multiple sheets. So let's say we bring in the context ones. I just have these floating right now, but I actually have a plan. Our data source filters has something in it. So then let's just bring all of these in. Now to make them more organized, so if you're floating, like I'm using a Figma background, so I have to float everything. So I like to do a controlled float. So if you put all of your floating objects into a single like master container, then you only have to adjust the sizing once instead of having to like constantly move floating objects and like track the X and Y and whatnot. Which maybe not everyone does that. I'm just kind of crazy about formatting, so. So let's bring in a horizontal container, which I actually want this to be vertical. So to change that, I don't even have to drag in a new vertical container. I can just make sure that when I put the second object in, I tell it where to put it, like what the orientation is. Oh, and to take things from being floating to tiled, you select the object or the worksheet, and you hit shift and then select this little tab at the top of it, and you drag it in. And just make sure that blue border is showing before you drop it. Okay, now we have all those in there. We can just distribute evenly. And we can start applying that dynamic zone. So our table calcs would be last, so that's 7. And you'll notice they start disappearing because we don't actually have those selected right now. The set filters are 4. Context filters are 3. Oh. Data source filters are 2. We already have it applied to our extract filters, and dimension filters are 5. So now all those sheets will pop up as we make our selection. So that one's working. Same with that one. And it's always good to double check, especially when you have a lot. And I love anytime I can use dynamic zone or talk about it, I will, because I remember, and maybe some of you do as well, but I remember before dynamic zone, there was like a workaround or hack for switching sheets like that. And it was so, it was just not fun. It was not as seamless as this process. So definitely recommend using Dynamic Zone if you can, or if you need to. Any other questions?
Lauren, there was a question earlier about relevant values. What's the guidance around relevant values? When they've been used, it's slowed down the dashboard. Are there better ways to get around that?
Yeah, for relevant values. So yeah, they do slow down performance. And if you do like the performance optimizer before you publish, so like run optimizer, like it's going to yell at me for unused fields and only relevant values. I would say instead of using only relevant values, I mean, doing those dashboard filter actions help a lot. That way you're not having Tableau load a list in the background of everything that's relevant based on other filtered selections. And if you still want to see a category list, you can make a sheet like with the customer list. And it'll already have it in the view. So as you're making these selections, it'll basically do that relevant values list.
I would say too, like, that's a really good point, Lauren, and also just thinking thoughtfully or consciously about the amount of data you're bringing into Tableau and where you might be able to use an extract or data source filter to limit the overall volume of the data.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, especially with those extract filters or even the data source filters that you then add to context. You're just making a smaller subset of what you actually want from a large like volume of data.
Another question, Lauren, that came in, do filters in a container need to be tiled to distribute evenly?
Oh, formatting questions. Love it.
Yeah.
So no, they do not have to be tiled. They have to be tiled within the container, but the container does not have to be tiled, if that makes sense. So like right now I have these filters within this container and they're tiled within the container, but then the container itself is also tiled. But if I were to remove it and have it be floating, we can still, anything that's within the container can be distributed evenly, regardless if the container is floating or tiled. I think, is that what they meant?
Yeah, Brian, was that helpful? Want to clarify? We can clarify more. Yep, we're good.
Sweet.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I guess we could pause here. We're almost at time, Lauren. But yeah, any other questions from the group? Lauren, in a given project, when you're working on something, I guess, what are you paying most attention to in the order of operations or filters? Is it mostly context filters? Is it all the above?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, I mean, ideally all the above, but mostly the context, like what filters are in context, especially if I'm having to use any kind of fixed LOD calcs, which I have to use a lot. So I'm always acutely aware of my filters and if they're in context or not. Because if I
Yeah.
don't have that added to the fixed, it won't be applied. And sometimes you don't want it to be applied, but then other times you do.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, last chance. Any questions from the group? Okay. Lauren, I think we can wrap a little early. What's our next session for next month? Do we have that figured out?
No, actually, I think it might be cool to open that up to the group. If you guys have any topics that you can think of that you'd love to see in this format kind of explored together, just
I
let
mean,
us
Lauren,
know.
you can always do formatting, but we could do sessions of the parameters. We could touch on Tableau Pulse. We could do, we could think of more tips, tricks. But yeah, if anyone wants to type out any sessions that are particularly interesting, we can add that. Lauren
Can
is
I,
you're very adaptable, Lauren. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Shauna.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't feel like typing, but I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could go over stories in the dashboards, because I've seen that before. I don't know exactly how they work as a feature.
Yeah, we could easily weave that in. They're with stories, Shauna, they are kind of PowerPoint meets Tableau. That's how you can think of it. So we could certainly demonstrate how they're used, but they're great for presentations, I would say.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Someone
would say have
recommended
fun.
containers.
Oh yeah, containers. Yeah, we might
Yeah.
do more on containers. I
More on
have
containers.
a
Yeah.
story that I don't ever use stories, but I've used it in one case where I made a like a formatting guide. And
Yeah.
basically a story is a collection of dashboards, like a dashboard is a collection of sheets, if that makes
Lord,
sense.
maybe we do Figma, a little bit of Figma. And
Oh, I'd love to do some Figma.
I don't know if anyone in the group uses Figma, but as you know, building a template that you could import into Tableau and then have your sheets and yeah, your sheets go into those Figma templates. That could be interesting. We could definitely talk containers though. Cool. Okay. All right. We have some ideas. Lauren, you and I can talk and we can think about the next session.
Yeah, sounds good.
Good. Awesome. Lauren, thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone in the group for their time. We'll see you next month. And